Right. Well, it's 6 o'clock. I think we can probably start. I think people have filled in and people will catch up. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We haven't done many online programs here at the museum. We've done a few, so please bear with us if we have some technological kind of challenges along the way. But I think we're pretty good. But if you have a question or you're having some sort of issue, please type it into the chat, and either I or Elizabeth Garrison, our education curator, will try to address it during the talk. My name is Jonathan Bucci. I'm a curator of collections and exhibitions here at the Hallie Ford Museum of Art, and I curated the exhibition Depth of Field, selections from the Bill Rhodes collection of Northwest photography, which I organized in collaboration with Bill as well. That show is on view at the museum right now and is up through April 23rd. And this panel discussion is a program related to that. We wanted to bring together a few of the artists, as well as Prudence as a historian, to kind of talk about Northwest photography with a kind of a focus on Oregon and the history of it, and share that with everyone. The way this evening will kind of work is, as the panel discussion, we'll start off where Bill and I kind of have a little bit of a conversation to introduce people to who Bill is. And then we'll move into each of the panelists. Prudence Roberts, Stu Levy, and Craig Hickman will each make a presentation about their area of interest and experience as it relates to the topic. And then once they've finished their presentation, we'll have sort of a group panel conversation discussion, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions from everyone who's come to hear us at the end. So please save your questions till the end, and you can either type your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and either me or Elizabeth will indicate to you, or I don't know if we need to unmute you or not. Maybe you can control your mutes, but please stay muted throughout our presentations until we get to the end. And I'm going to start off with introductions for everyone who's on the panel, and then we'll jump into it. So we'll start off with Bill Rhodes. Bill has been a supporter of the Hallie Ford Museum of Art since it was founded in 1998. Over the past 23 years, Bill has donated over 800 artworks to the museum, more than any other collector, and all by artists from or affiliated with the Northwest. Bill has been instrumental in helping the museum build the strong foundation of Northwest art, for which it is well known. And visitors to the museum will see his name on label credit lines throughout the permanent collection galleries of Northwest art and Native American art. The Bill Rhodes collection at the museum includes not only photography, as featured in the Depth of Field exhibition, but also includes paintings, sculptures, prints, drawings, as well as traditional Native American basketry and beadwork. And all the works that are part of the Bill Rhodes collection at the museum were donated in memory of Bill's parents, Myrna and Bay Rhodes. Bill's interest in photography also includes efforts to help preserve photographic archives. And in 2016, he helped establish the Pacific Northwest Photographers Archive in partnership with the University of Washington in Seattle. And that is his effort to help preserve photographic materials related to the history of photography in this region. Before retirement, Bill worked as a journalist for the Madras Pioneer from 1979 to 1995, and a writer and editor in the Natural Resources branch of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs from 1995 to 2012. Craig Hickman, who will be our first presenter tonight after we hear from Bill, is a photographer, software designer, and professor emeritus at the University of Oregon, where he began teaching in 1984. Much of his early projects feature local artists and the art scene in Portland from the 1960s onward, as well as the student-led anti-war protests that were occurring all over the city around that time. In 1975, Craig, alongside a group of young Portland photographers, including Robert DeFranco, Ann Hughes, Terry Totemier, Christopher Rauschenberg, co-founded the Blue Sky Gallery in downtown Portland. And his more recent works are composite photos presenting narratives that combine base images with text and iconography. Craig's work is included in the collections of the Harry Ransom Humanities Research Center at the University of Texas, the Portland Art Museum, the Archive of Visual and Concrete Poetry, Seattle Arts Commission, Oregon State Capitol Collection, Evergreen State College, and George Eastman House, among others. We are also lucky to have Stu Levy with us tonight. Stu is a Portland photographer who was born and raised in Cincinnati, pursued photography in high school and college, photographing some of the biggest rock bands of the era, including the Grateful Dead, the Rolling Stones, and Bob Dylan. He enrolled in medical school, and his medical residency is what brought him to Portland in 1974, where he worked in family practice. In 1979, Stu attended a photo workshop led by Ansel Adams at Yosemite National Park and returned the following years as an assistant instructor. Ultimately, he set up photographic workshops in Oregon and reduced his medical practice in order to devote more time to his photography. In 1982, he and Stuart Harvey, who's also included in the exhibition here at the museum, created the Portland Photographic Workshop, offering workshops with a focus on craft and aesthetics. Stu's primary focus rests on photographing the natural landscape, and in particular areas in Oregon, California, and the American Southwest, as well as grid portraits, collage-like portraits of artists and craftspeople in their environments. In addition to his photo that's included in the Depth of Field exhibition, one of his grid portraits featuring the former Portland Art Museum curator Gordon Gilkey is also on view at the museum, and it's spectacular, and I hope everyone gets a chance to see it. Stu's photographs are included in the collections of the Portland Art Museum, the Seattle Art Museum, the Tacoma Art Museum, the Cincinnati Museum of Art, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, and the Center for Creative Photography at the University of Arizona, among others. And Prudence Roberts, in June 2018, Prudence Roberts retired from her position as Professor of Art History and the Director of the Helzer Art Gallery at Portland Community College's Rock Creek campus. Prudence was Curator of American Art at the Portland Art Museum from 1987 to 2000, where she focused on the museum's regional and American collections and also specialized in early American museology. She was Curator of Disjecta's Portland 2012 Biennial and subsequently served on Disjecta's board. She was also the co-curator for Sun, Shadow, Stones, the photography of Terry Totemier, which was organized by the Tacoma Art Museum in 2018. Prudence is currently on the boards of Crow Shadow Institute for the Arts, or of the Arts, and the Multnomah County Cultural Coalition. And she has written on such Northwest artists as Brendan Mallory, Pat Boas, Ben Buswell, Jim Lomason, Jisun Lee Isbara, and others. So thank you all panelists for being here. We really appreciate your time and your interest in the topic. And so I will kind of shift over. We're going to first talk to Bill.
Jonathan, I want to pipe in just for a quick moment before we get. And
yes, please.
I just want to thank everybody that's involved in this. Andrea Faust for PR. John Olbrandt's the director of the museum. I think all the artists know that space in museums is very, very limited and demand is very, very high. So getting 2 galleries for almost 4 months is, that's a dream come true. Jonathan put a ton of effort into this. It's his idea. He pawed through tons of photographs. He researched for the exhibition labels, wrote the text boards, did an absolutely fabulous job of arranging the photographs and lighting the photographs. And I've got so many really good comments from people that have seen the exhibition. And to Coralie Pop, my girlfriend who held my hand through all this and put up with the Virgo intensities, if not the Virgo insanities that come with that. And Roger Hull, he started this adventure with me way back in '98 before the museum even opened. And he's been my main contact there, and we've done a lot together. And he wrote the very generous essay for the brochure and the exhibit. And just lastly, I want to thank all the photographers and the artists who made all this possible. And some of them are here tonight. And boy, I'm just so grateful to all you guys.
Thank you, Bill. And well, what I was going to start was thanking you, because 800 artworks, over 800 artworks donated to the museum, by far more than any other collector who we worked with, has had an enormous impact on the museum and on our community and what we're able to present and organize, and all of the work that you've put into doing that is greatly appreciated. And so thank you. You deserve a big round of applause. Unfortunately, we're here on Zoom and everyone's muted and you can't hear it. And so exactly. Thank you, Eric. Yes, thank you, Bill, for all of your work. This is it is an amazing and an amazing accomplishment. And thank you. And this exhibition is one way that we are expressing our gratitude. It's yes. So with that said, let me just ask you a couple of questions, Bill, about collecting. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you started collecting art and why photography was, I know you've collected a variety of things and we're lucky for that, but why photography is a particular focus. So how you started and then why, what about photography?
Yeah, well, it goes way back. I think I've always been prone to visual stimulation, and I had parents who grew up with country backgrounds, and they moved to Portland, but they took us on camping trips and fishing trips all over the place. So we were exposed to all this fabulous scenery in Oregon. How blessed are we to live in this state where you can go to the beach, you can go to the mountains, you can go out on the desert, and there's just one fabulous scene after another. And maybe when I was around 12 years old, my Aunt Merle, who lost her husband in World War II, she kind of looked out after her nephews, me and my brother and a couple of my cousins, and she always wanted to get us something really cool. And one year she bought me this Kodak snap and shoot camera. So I could take that out on these trips and, bring back little pieces of all these beautiful things. And that was great fun. And I think, probably every young photographer, you see somebody slap some emulsion on a strip of plastic that you put in a camera, and for a fraction of a second, you expose that to light, and here comes this image that's a reverse of what you saw. And then you run that through an enlarger, and it's like, wow, look what I made. This is magic. This is really, really something great. And so I started taking these pictures, and then eventually I got a little older and bought a more expensive camera, and people would compliment me that, oh, you really take some nice photographs, and those are really great. And so I thought I should start studying a little more, and I read about photographers, and I learned about Alfred Stieglitz and Paul Strand and Edward Steichen and Henri Cartier-Bresson and Imogen Cunningham and all these great people. And the upside of that was it gave me a pretty good idea of what fine art photography was. So I could recognize eventually what really good photographs were. The downside of that is I wasn't as good as my friends said I was. So it was a reality check for me. And I realized I wasn't going to be an Edward Western or an Ansel Adams or even a Ray Atkinson. But I thought, maybe there is something I can do with this. And so maybe, you're going to be an equipment manager instead of a quarterback, or a bat boy instead of the starting pitcher. But I had all this equipment from taking a correspondence course, floodlights, and I had a neighbor who happened to be an artist. And back in the old days, you had to get slides of your artwork in order to give those to the gallery so they could show potential clients. a variety of work instead of having hundreds of paintings in the gallery. So from that experience, I was able to make a trade of my photographic skills, such as they were, for artwork. And then I started going to his exhibitions and met other artists, and I went to their exhibitions and started slowly to collect art and learn more and more. I read more and more about Northwest art and the history of Northwest art. And that went on for a number of years, and I was happy with that. And along about 2003, I was making annual or twice annual extended trips up into the Seattle area and going to museums and galleries and meeting artist friends in Tacoma and Seattle and LaConner and Bellingham. And whenever I'd go into these museums, I'd see these photographs of the great artists of the era up there. You know, here's a photograph of Jacob Lawrence and Richard Gilkey and Leo Kenny and Mark Tobey and on and on and on. And every time I went up to read the labels on those, the photographer was the same. It was Mary Randlett. And so I took that memory back home, and I was at my friend George Johansson's having a cup of coffee one morning and telling him about my adventures in Seattle. And I said, you know, I keep seeing these photographs by this Mary Randlett, and I think she's really great. But George says, well, you know, she came down here and photographed a lot of Oregon artists too. And I said, boy, I'd love to see some of those. And so he said, well, I've got her address. So I wrote to Mary, and she wrote back, and it was kind of an instantaneous friendship. We got together. I ended up getting 2 photographs initially from her, one of Louis Bunce, another of Carl and Hilda Morris. And I traded her a rug of some sort for that, which I've done many, many times. And that just launched this great friendship. And she said that all those Oregon portraits had never really been seen. They were just tucked away in the catacombs. So we got her a show at the Laura Russo Gallery. We got her a show at the Hallie Ford Museum. And it was just a course change for me. You know, it was like, I want to go back to my roots. I want to start collecting photographs. I always loved photographs. There weren't a lot of places where you could get those. And if you could find something I liked, I couldn't afford it. So it was mainly because of Mary that I really got into collecting photography.
Okay. And so as a collector of photography, is there something specific that attracts you to a particular photo or a particular artist? Is there aesthetics? There's a historical significance, some other kind of factor or combination of those things? Like as a collector, what draws you to the particular pieces that you acquire?
Well, sure, it's all that. I mean, if I walk into a room of any kind of artwork, you know, I'm probably going to scan the room and something's going to catch my eye. And it's odd how often that those turn out to be the pieces that I really like. Sometimes it doesn't work when you get closer examination. Maybe it lacks something that you thought it had, but you know, it has to be something that catches your eye. And maybe it's just a lovely scene. Maybe it's a striking image. It might be a reminder of some experience you had in the past. I love contrast. I love black and white, obviously, as you can see by the exhibition. I love etchings and wood block prints, but I also love tonal range. And I like captivating human postures. I love it when people can come up with a unique view of a commonplace subject. You know, I think that's fabulous. It could be a lot of things, you know, camera angle, lighting, the arrangement of compositional elements. But I think the main thing maybe that runs through all this is it has to show some passion and sensitivity and soul. You know, it's about those kinds of things. And I always think Henry David Thoreau had a great quote that should have applied to photographers, although it didn't. He said, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. And in photography, in my mind, it's all about seeing. And all these great people that are in this exhibition, they have a keen eye. and they have the technical expertise to be able to do something about it. But there's a lot of elements that go into that, but I love those, and each and every one of those photographs that you put together in that exhibition, I love every one of them, and for all different reasons.
Thank you, Bill. That's really great to hear. Hopefully that gives people a sense a little bit of how this collection was formed and the person kind of behind that. I think we're gonna shift. We'll have a chance to hear more from Bill at the end, but we're gonna turn it over to Craig now for him to talk. So Craig, it's on you.
Okay, thank you. What I'm going to show today is kind of picture driven. There's hardly a word in my slides here, and I kind of went through just images I had of people, and I got 100 pictures, and I figured 10 minutes, that's 600 seconds, and divided by 100, that's 6 seconds a picture. So that's kind of how I did that. But now I have to get this going here to make sure I can share the screen properly. I have quite a bit of, I have an elaborate setup here, which actually causes me more trouble than it does help. But let's just see if that works now. Oh, do you see one picture?
No, it isn't. It isn't sharing yet, Craig.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's not.
Let's see. Try that again. Share screen.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, now let's see. Do you see two pictures or one picture?
We see two.
Okay, that's not good. I am going to do this by I'm going to go back again. I am sorry about this.
Oh, it's okay.
I'm going to take my 10 minutes up. Just when I see other people doing this, I think, boy, why can't they just figure out how to do that?
No, it worked. It worked fine in our.
Why are they wasting my time? And then here I am. I get to waste everybody's time. There, one picture or two?
You're not sharing anymore.
Oh.
We've lost the share screen.
Okay, well, let's just do this. Let's go back and do it this way. There's the trouble with the dual monitor thing. Okay, you can see pictures now, right?
Yep, and we see one picture.
Oh, yeah, but you probably also see my. Oh well.
We see your slides on the left.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's just do it this way.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is kind of a journey of people I knew in photography in the Northwest and the places that I had been. And so I'm going to kind of move through it quickly. I'm leaving out an enormous number of people. There are people I've noticed in the audience who should be mentioned. But this was built out of pictures I had. This is me when I was first starting photography in high school, and I only knew one person who was a photographer. Actually, here's my darkroom. Here's my original darkroom there with the old Federal enlargement. You'll notice the ferrotype plate polish. Here's a picture I made in my high school classroom, and here's a picture of Diana Ross I made. And the other person who I knew that did photography was this person. Anybody recognize him? Well, I guess you can't say if you did. That's Terry Totemier, who is a good friend of mine since high school. There's another picture of Terry. We kind of a setup picture on my motorcycle there. Now, when I graduated from high school, I had the very fortunate opportunity, and I didn't know it was an opportunity, but when I started at Portland State, my girlfriend worked with a photographer, Clyde Keller, who worked on the yearbook. And as it turned out, the yearbook was not a normal yearbook at all. This is actually a copy of the 1967 version that I first worked on. But it was put together, and there's the inside. It was put together as a professional project. It was printed by it wasn't printed by a yearbook company. It was all spec'd from to be just the way we wanted it. This was a meeting of the group, and here are two advisors. Arvid Orbeck, who was a graphic designer in town, one of the top graphic designers. He was the graphic design advisor, and I don't think he needed the job. I think he just wanted to give his knowledge to the world. And Wilman Morrison, who was a legendary journalism professor. And so, and the book was put together from scratch. And so one of the things I learned in my years working on it was how to put together a book. Incidentally, this person is Bill Plimpton, who was the famous animator and an illustrator. He went on to have a lot of work illustrated in everything you can imagine, the New York Times, the Atlantic, and so on. And then he became an animator and was nominated for 2 Emmys. Here are the 2 photographers that were kind of my mentors at that time, Clyde Keller and Jim Felt. And many of you know Jim, and Clyde unfortunately passed away a short time ago. But they had been, in the summer before I started, they had been down at the University of Oregon and had taken a workshop from W. Eugene Smith. And so they were, again, not your normal yearbook photographer, but they were very professional. And so I kind of got this kind of training, very professional training. I can remember Clyde telling me now, if there's any dust on your picture at all, that just kind of stinks of being an amateur. So another person I knew at Portland State was Jim Blastfield. Some of you know Jim, who went on and he made a lot of the classic MTV videos for Talking Heads. I think I was the first one for Joni Mitchell, Michael Jackson, so on. And then here are a few pictures that were made kind of in that kind of journalistic tradition in Portland. This is the one that's in the show at the Hallie Ford. But I took thousands and thousands of pictures. I have an enormous archive. This is the yearbook staff. And here are some pictures I took of kind of the, famous people. He was known as Stokely Carmichael at that time. McCarthy, Gene McCarthy, Robert Kennedy, and so on. And there were many demonstrations, so I have quite a catalog of pictures of demonstrations. And this was the famous, May park blocks 50 years ago when there was a kind of a police riot. One of the people I met at Portland State, who continued to be a friend and colleague, was Ann Hughes. There's my dark room at that time. You see, it got to be a little bit better. This is William Grand, Bill Grand, and his photography class. And his photography class was a very important kind of centerpiece in photography in Portland at that time. It was basically the only photography class in town, as far as I knew. And it brought in people from everywhere. And Grand was actually a wonderful person. And he was also kind of connected with the interim workshop, people that I think that Stu will probably talk about. But he was a great person. Here's Bill in his view camera. And here's a picture of Shad Williams. And of course, Shad is an important figure in Northwest photography. Unfortunately, he's moved to Chicago, but he started the Shadow Gallery in Oregon City, and is a fantastic master photographer himself. There's a picture of Shad talking to Brett Weston in the White Gallery at Portland State. Now, this is a picture of Ann Hughes and George Query, but also the person on the left actually I believe is in the audience here, is Kirk Thompson. And Kirk was a professor at Reed at the time, and was very involved with photography, and took the class at Portland State, took Bill Grand's class at Portland State to be part of a community and to grow. And so Kirk then, and after I graduated in the next year, here's a picture of me at that time, which I'm sure everybody wants to see. Ended up going to on the faculty at the Evergreen State College when it first opened. But in the summer of, this would have been the summer of 1971, Paul Sparks took the class, took the summer class at PSU, and Kirk was also in it, and Ann was in it, a number of us were in it, and also we took a trip down to Bay Area, and there's Jim Lomason in the class. And of course, Jim is a very important figure in the photography in Portland, and has done some very important work. And here's Kirk at Evergreen. Now, this was the first year Evergreen opened, and then Paul Sparks ended up working there too. And it was one of those kind of magic times for photography. For one thing, Kirk and Paul were, very, very important teachers to many people, and also just sort of, Kirk was, very smart, and really built a rigor into the program. Another great thing about Evergreen was students would take the photography program as a full-time program. They get 16 credit hours. So it was definitely immersive, and a lot of great people came out of it, and including Larry Schlim and Bob Isle, whom I couldn't include in this because I couldn't find the website for their pictures. But at any rate, this picture was made on the first day that I worked there, and this is Chris Rauschenberg, who has remained a good friend, and many of you know. And then here's Stu Tilger, who's also in the audience. He was as a photographer, was a commercial photographer in Seattle, or is, and has done some remarkable work. And Julie Mahaley, another photographer who has gone on to do some really kind of exceptional things. Here's Gloria Lamson, Glo Lamson, who's a photographer, lives in Washington State, and still is very active. And I think one of the interesting things about the people, the students who studied there, is that, as far as I know, almost or all of them are still doing photography actively. It was not just sort of a passing interest. Here are just some other pictures I ran across. This is Linda Weinman. Some of you know lynda.com. She started lynda.com and then sold it to LinkedIn for who knows how many hundreds of millions of dollars. Here's Pete Stone, a commercial photographer in Portland, who was kind of one of the real hot photographers. He, Nike and other kind of large, corporations like that were his clients, and he was, quite the well-known photographer. It was interesting because Pete, as they say, marched to the beat of a different drummer. Most of us were kind of involved with kind of art, black and white art photography, and we sort of had the people that we admired. Well, he liked Pete Turner, and he liked working with Cibachrome prints, and he just sort of, went on his own and ended up with this really interesting career. Here's Frank Foster, who ended up being the head of the first digital effects division at Sony Pictures. Steve Semmel, who is a film editor. He's the editor of, I know he worked on Lost, and he worked on Westworld, and he's quite a well-known film editor. So Craig Collins, who's a friend, and he was Oprah's official photographer in Los Angeles. I see Craig sometimes when I'm visiting. There's Amanda Sargent and Christine Larson. Amanda's a painter in Seattle, and Christine, kind of a media artist in New York. This picture is a picture of Carla Brennan, which is kind of interesting because she was not a photographer at all at Evergreen, and has gone on to be this kind of amazing wildlife photographer. So very, very, very impressive. And this person is John Willis. And the reason why I'm showing this picture is not a great picture, but John is the first of my students who had a teaching career and has retired. So that means you're old when your students have retired. There's my cat that lived by there. Now this picture is included because it has a picture of a computer terminal. For me, this was a kind of a bifurcating of my life that I sort of had the photo side, and then I had a computer side where I just fell in love with programming and ended up having the kind of the digital art side be a big part of my life. But that's not part of the story today. Ford Gilbreth started to work at Evergreen, and Ford is a fantastic photographer. Many of you know of Ford and his work. And one of the things that those of us in, kind of oriented towards Evergreen did was we were connected with Seattle. And the Silver Image Gallery was a very important thing there. There's also Equivalence Gallery. And then at one point, I left Evergreen for a while and then went back, but I left for a while, and my friend Ann Hughes and Bob DeFranco were starting a gallery. And Chris had graduated, Chris Rauschenberg, and he agreed, I agreed to join it, and Chris agreed to join it, and we started Blue Sky Gallery. And this is the front of the gallery. This is the very first show. It looks like we don't really have our signage up yet because we just have a poster in the window. But actually, that's the way it stayed. Actually, the name of the gallery was that first poster with the word Blue Sky cut out and pasted to the window. But this was a great space, and it was it was a wonderful time. And we'll revisit this space a little bit later. Here's Anne. There's Chris at roughly at that time. There's Bob DeFranco, and also Tom Champion, which we'll talk about in a second. And I think Bob is in the audience today. And there's yours truly here. This is the Karen Truax show. We would each take a day and sit at the gallery. And so that was, there were, kind of enough of us that we could run it all right. Also, if we found the rent was so low that if we pooled our unemployment checks, we could pay the rent. One of the things, there's Anne and her dog Angela in front of the gallery. And one of the things Blue Sky was well known for was the posters. Anne, besides being a great photographer, was or is a great graphic designer. And so we ended up knowing about a printer that was kind of a wholesale printer. So we could take the little bit of money we got from donations each month and have these posters printed. And because the posters were so effective, and we also had Chris got the mailing list from the Light Gallery in New York. And so we sent a lot of the posters out around the country, and we were projecting this image of being much bigger than we were. It was not that we were intentionally doing that, but that just happened, and people were a little surprised when they visited. And Terry, of course, Terry Totemier started Blue Sky. Yeah, naturally, Terry. We've already seen Terry, and we'll be seeing more of Terry in a minute. Okay. There's a picture of Anne and Chris on a St. Patrick's Day. Here we've got Chris and Terry and me, and there's Ruby and I'm not sure who else. Here is Chris and Kay at the Blue Sky, and then here's just a bunch of people, including Bob Isle right there, and there's Bob DeFranco and others. let's see, who else is there? Let's see, it doesn't. Now, one of the things that I went back to Evergreen when I was working there and doing Blue Sky. And one of the things we did was start a summer program at Evergreen, where Ford, Gilbreth, and I were kind of the main faculty. And then the 5 of us from Blue Sky would take turns. And but they'd each come for a week or 2 in the summer. And so we called it the Summer Photography Institute. And, we hadn't done this before, but we had students, full time. They were getting the 16 credit hours. And we did this, and we were happy we survived. And then Dan Evans, who was the former governor, who was president of Evergreen at the time, sent a memo around saying that we should, the entire school should use this program as an example of how to do a summer program. And so that was kind of one of those surprising things where you just think you're getting by, but it ends up being more. But besides Terry, Chris, Ann, Bob, and myself at Blue Sky, over the years, a number of other people were very deeply involved. And Donna Mitchell took the program at Evergreen. She was a student at Evergreen and ended up being a co-director, we're all called co-directors at Blue Sky for a number of years. And also Tom Champion, again, came in and was a co-director at Blue Sky for many years. Here's, I think, our 5th anniversary party. There's Tom, and Linda Berry also was Linda Berry was a student at Evergreen also. I didn't mention Linda, and also Matt Graining was a student at Evergreen. I didn't know him, but I knew Linda, but she was the DJ at the party. Paul Sutton in there, and who's a writer. Blue Sky was always doing kind of interesting things, I thought, like having a photo booth. Here's this picture of Terry. Should have it got misplaced. It should have been with the other Blue Sky directors when I was showing that. So let's see. I ended up going to the University of Washington to get my MFA and studying with Paul Berger, so I was there for a couple of years. Another person who graduated from University of Washington and started just after I did is Tom Semperi, who is in the audience tonight, and he's the curator of photography at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum. So I ended up getting a job teaching at the University of Oregon, and this is a picture I took of myself. I was making these kind of pictures of desktops. But I did not teach photography at the University of Oregon. In their wisdom, they had me do something else. I taught digital arts, but the people who taught or teach photography there were Terry Warpinski. And of course, the University of Oregon has a history of teaching photography that kind of, again, Stu might probably touch on, because Bernie Freemesser, it was a kind of a famous program at that time, and but this is kind of the more contemporary when I was there. Terry was hired at the same time I was. Actually, I applied for the job too, and she got it, but they hired me to do anyway. And Dan Powell, who is here today. Here's Dan, and Dan has taught for many years. He's retired. Both Terry and Dan are retired. There's the website. Whoops. Currently, Ron Jude is teaching, and there is a search for a new faculty member in photography, and I do not know if they have chosen someone yet or not. But Ron is kind of a well-known photographer. He received recently a Guggenheim, and is really a very accomplished. Colleen Raphael also teaches there, as does Jonathan Bagby, and I'm not quite sure, since I am retired, if anyone else does at the time. Some notable, there are many notable graduates of the program. A few that I kind of rubbed shoulders with a little bit were Jason Langer, and apparently this book is out of print and is really valuable. But he is a very well-known photographer now. Michael Sherwin, who just gave a talk last week. He came to town and gave a talk on this book of Vanishing Points. Lorena Turner, Los Angeles. She lives in Los Angeles and New York, and is very active in photography. And Jason DeMarte, who's another, has had a very successful career in that program, and Jessica Radsky, who teaches at the in Idaho, in the North Idaho College, and Mick Briscoe, who is in the show at Hallie Ford. And of course, Susie Morell, who is kind of a very important figure in photography, especially in Eugene and the photography Oregon community. Blue Sky in, let's see, got to get my years right here. In 2014, the Portland Art Museum did a major exhibit based on Blue Sky's 40th anniversary. This is the outside of the museum. And here's a book, a beautiful catalog printed, which has many photographs that were shown at Blue Sky over the years, and articles and interviews with, and it's just very good. And actually here's the book is open, and on one page we have Stu Levy, his work on the left, and John Davola on the right. Here is the gallery talk at the museum with Julia Dolan, and then we also had a 40th anniversary event at Blue Sky. The picture I have of the gallery was printed kind of full size in the gallery, and here are a bunch of us gathered around the picture. And here is a scale model. I'm sorry, it's not scale. It's actually full-size model of the original gallery that's built inside of the current Blue Sky. There's our cake. And Blue Sky exhibitions are selected by an exhibition committee, and it is unique. I do not believe there is any other institution that does it this way. That anyone who is a member of Blue Sky, who pays their whatever I don't even know what it costs, can be on the exhibition committee. They have to attend a certain number of meetings, and there's a couple of little useful hoops to jump through, and then you can vote on the exhibits. And so this is one from several years ago. You may recognize some. I know Ralph Wells is here tonight. He's there in both of these. Here's another group of them, and here's, before the meeting, we normally kind of get together. Here's and the exhibition committee hangs it. Interestingly, this is the other Stu Levy who's on the committee who's on at Blue Sky, and hanging the work. And there's Nancy Butler. Now Nancy is, I think, the only person besides Chris and I who are still on the exhibition committee after, whatever it is, 20, 30 years. Here's a little picture made in the dark here, kind of surreptitiously, of the committee looking at the work. And there's Ann Candellan over there on the side. Now, Ann, and I look at Ann, I always feel guilty, because I was involved in Blue Sky for like the first 5 years. I went away for 30 years and came back, and I get to be celebrated as one of the founders. There are a number of people, including Ann, who put in many years of good, hard service to the gallery, but just because they weren't there in this first few months or first couple of years, they don't get to have that honor. Chris Rauschenberg started putting together Blue Sky books. There's a book for every show. This is my son, Ben, and Ben designed the template. Ben is a graphic designer, and did that. He's holding them. And I believe Blue Sky is probably the largest book publisher in the world of photo books in sheer number, because there are 1 or 2 published every month. And then here we have the kind of just a look at the current Blue Sky. These are just things that are online or presentations we've had. And finally, this is my last slide here. It's the current staff, and I wish I had pictures of the staff, but Molly Newgard is the executive director. We actually have this fantastic staff. Molly's the executive director, and C. Myers, the exhibitions manager, and Harper Brookhoff-Falbo is the gallery manager. And it is it's just a good time for Blue Sky right now. And I think Blue Sky is coming up on its 1,000th exhibition. And Blue Sky is noted for showing people before they were famous. I mean, and now we kind of have a mixture of famous people and then people who are not yet famous. Let's see. I'm sorry I did not. I didn't. There are a lot of people I left out. A lot of things I left out. But that is my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Craig. That was really wonderful history, and nice to see faces to names for me, at least. And that was really great. So we're going to turn it over to Stu. And Stu, you are up next.
Yeah, let's see what I can do here. See if I can find the right feature to share, and it's working. And I really thank Craig for that intense history. I'm going to give a much more limited presentation, as it were. I'm basically going to give a little overview of how I got involved in photography in Oregon, my perceptions of the photo community, and then just a couple of my own photos. But let's see if I can, yeah. So basically my first exposure to photography here, and one of the turning points for me, was seeing an exhibit of Ansel Adams photos at the Art Museum in 1975. And even though I was familiar with photographs, and I had been a photographer, similar to Craig doing yearbook work in high school and college, I really hadn't seen fine art prints in the flesh, as it were. And when I saw the pictures of Ansel at the Art Museum, my jaw dropped. It was as if light was radiating out of the photos. And I said, I want to learn how to make a print like that. And I ended up as a student at the Ansel Adams workshop in 1979. And this is a photo of Ansel with me out of focus in the background. But around this time, I was told by the people in Yosemite at the Ansel thing to look up certain people in Portland. But also around that time, maybe in 77 or so, I really wasn't acquainted with the Portland scene. And this is before I went to the Ansel workshop. But I remember going to I started to go to the Blue Sky shows. I didn't go to the original gallery, but I went to the second generation. And I remember going to a show at Reed College of Gary Winogrand's work. And Gary was actually here doing a little presentation on a Saturday morning at Reed. And there were less than 10 people standing around him while he gave a little talk. And I didn't know anybody there, although in retrospect, I think that the people in that room at the time included Jim Lamas and Larry Schlim, Terry Totemier, Chris Rauschenberg, maybe Joe Deese. It was almost like a who's who of what was going on at the time. But I was an outsider. I really didn't know much about what was going on. So by 81, I became an assistant instructor at Ansel's workshop. And when I came back to Portland, I was told I should look up Cherie Heiser, who I met, and I met Stuart Harvey. And I met Stuart by buying a camera from him, and he ended up becoming a student at the 81 Ansel workshop when I was there as an assistant instructor. And just to jump ahead, this is sort of what the scene was like at Ansel's workshop. This was my group of 12 students going to Ansel's house. There's Ansel in Virginia in the background. But coming back from the Ansel workshop, Stuart and I were so buzzed. And to paraphrase the Buffalo Springfield For What It's Worth song, there's something happening here. To me, there was an energy in the photo scene in Portland and the whole I-5 corridor that was analogous to my perception of what was happening in music in the 60s. There was just a magic in the air. And my perception of the scene, as it were, in Portland was that there was the Art Museum, there was Blue Sky Gallery, there was the interim workshop group, which was mostly led by Arnold Rustin and Bill Galen. And Bill had talked Good Samaritan Hospital into creating Camera Work Gallery, which I think is the longest running photo gallery in the country at this point, even though it's moved locations. And then there was also the Eugene and Seattle scene. Eugene had the U of O. There was Bernie Freemesser, who had brought in, he was friends with Ansel, and people would flow through Eugene. There was also the Seattle scene that included not only Paul Berger, but also the Silver Image Gallery. So that was sort of the background. And then I started meeting some of the people. I was told to look up Cherie Heiser, who was from Portland, had gone out, started her own workshop program that brought in every photographer in the country in the 60s and 70s, including Lee Friedlander and Jerry Yulesman. Shad Williams was a big force here in town, and he had a following that was called the Inner Light Group. Jerry Robinson was sort of another force who was friends with Brett Weston. He was involved with the original bringing of Minor White to Portland in 1959. He helped set up the paperwork for Aperture magazine and for the Friends of Photography, Ansel's organization in Carmel. And he had been involved with the interim workshop also. And then I mentioned Ray Atkinson, symbolic of all the commercial photographers that were working in Portland at the time. And basically, Stuart Harvey and I put together something that we ended up calling the Portland Photographic Workshops. And I put ourselves in the center of this because we tried to reach out to everybody and make connections in every direction. And to me, there was just this incredible community of photographers in Portland that really set the tone for community, for learning, for opening horizons of what was possible photographic. So that's sort of my impression of the Portland photo scene. I'm just going to show a couple of my own photos, a couple of the early things that got alluded to earlier. A photo I made of Bob Dylan in 1965, in the days when you could just walk up to the stage, and if you had long hair and a camera. A couple of Grateful Dead photos, Jerry Garcia on the left and Pigpen on the right. And then my work shifted into more formal landscape work after the Ansel workshop. This was done a few months after I studied with Ansel. But I want to show 3 of my grid portraits because they relate to the Hallie Ford Museum talk. The first is of Terry Totemier, and this was the first successful grid portrait that I made, just intending to photograph the bridge and starting to take pictures of Terry and getting him in 4 or 5 different locations in this. A photograph of Cherie Heiser, based on the photograph that Judy Dater made of her on the lower left, where she's nude and holding a circuit camera photo of an army troop, and then several of Cherie's students holding her up, and I refer to this as Cherie and her support group. And finally, the portrait of Gordon Gilkey that's actually hanging at the Hallie Ford Museum. Gordon was just such an important person in the art scene in Portland. He's in the vault at the museum. He's in the old Portland Art Museum School, and then in the Gilkey Print Center in his library. And there's some Polaroids of the photo down here, including one of Terry that I used as a test print for how I would position Gordon in this. So I'm going to leave it at that, and that's just sort of my perception of the Portland scene, and my perspective of what was going on when I entered the scene.
Thank you, Stu. That's really interesting to see how these different groups and kind of different kind of groups or factions form to create a scene. And I think that's kind of helpful, the visuals to picture that. And we're moving on to Prudence. And Prudence, you're up.
I don't need to share my screen. I don't have any images. I was sort of going to respond to what everybody else had said and talk a little bit about the ideas that unite Bill's collection, which have so much to do with, first of all, his own very good eye, and secondly, his interest in a particular aesthetic, which I think I had. Craig, your history was fascinating. I mean, it was in so much depth. I can't pretend to know all that. So my background is really from the museum where I worked, and also from being Terry's wife and understanding the Portland photo scene sort of through his eyes and through his work. And I wanted to give you just to put what both Stu and Craig have said about the Northwest scene into perhaps a deeper historical context. It seems to me that photography from the early 20th century has been very important to Portland. The very first camera club in Oregon was founded in 1895 and continued well into the 20s and 30s. The Portland Art Museum from its inception showed a lot of very interesting photographers, including, I just have a couple highlights here. In 1910, they had a show of Alice Boughton, who was an East Coast photographer, but who was a member of Alfred Stieglitz's Photo Secession Group, which was founded in 1902. And some of you may be aware that 3 of that very elite group of national photographers were women in Portland. Lily White, Sarah Ladd, and Myra Albert Wiggins, who lived further down in the Willamette Valley. They're well represented in the museum's collections, and also there's a great chapter about them in Wild Beauty, which was the show that Terry organized for the museum in 2008, which showcased the photographers who came up to look at the Columbia River Gorge from the 1850s until 1950, when Celilo, when the dams went in, 1959. 1915, Imogen Cunningham, who was then in Seattle, had her first solo exhibition at the Portland Art Museum. And in 1932, Minor White arrived in Portland, and I think that completely, and spent his formative years learning photography here in the city, and worked not only for the WPA, which he did, both in around Portland and then over in Eastern Oregon, but also I think the landscape, the people here, he was a member of the camera club, really shaped his aesthetic. And in turn, he came back and reshaped the aesthetic, if you will, because the other thing that I thought was interesting to think about in this broader context is the connections that so many photographers in Oregon and Washington had with just sort of the West Coast movement, Edward Weston, Ansel Adams, and the F-64 group, and the way that photography was being seen increasingly in the sort of mid 20th century as a tool for expression, as the landscape as a place to sort of locate a kind of a spiritual or an emotional or an intellectual response to things. And Portland, it seems to me, people in Portland really picked up on that. And then concurrently with that, there was beginning, well, from earlier times, but also this interest in kind of the photograph as a human document. And that I think Blue Sky has done a lot with over the years, that kind of looking at photography. So, and then also Stu, your Oregon Photographers Workshop in 1982, I think is a real highlight of the local history. So those are my remarks, which are very brief. And I think I really appreciate you all, Bill, Craig, and Stu, for your insights.
Thank you, Prudence. So I guess for us, before we kind of open up for questions from people who are our audience here, I guess one question I kind of have is someone who doesn't, who's learning a lot of this myself at the beginning, and not from Oregon. I've been here for 15 years now, but I still feel like an outsider on some level. But I guess and this is maybe a silly question, but it's a question that has kind of come to my mind a few times during the process of this organizing this exhibition and kind of talking with various people about it is, and this is a question for I guess everyone on the panel, is would you say that is there a Northwest aesthetic? Is there something that makes a photograph, particularly a Northwest photograph, that's beyond just a photograph of a particular place in the Northwest? Is there something that you think makes a Northwest or even an Oregon photograph something special or different or unique in terms of its regionalism.
Well, nobody wants to talk, so I'll just say they're the best.
But don't you think our landscape, as others have alluded to, is something that shapes a lot of, well, particularly a lot of the photographs in your collection, Bill?
And true, and the painters, all the Seattle mystics, they talked about the light in the Northwest. It's very unique.
Yeah.
I think there's maybe this isn't an aesthetic thing, but it's a kind of a social thing that I think people in the Northwest, especially in Portland and the Portland area, Eugene, are a lot more kind of open to just sort of doing something themselves. You know, they I know. Well, I shouldn't say this because, but you know, I know when the mayor spoke at the Blue Sky anniversary, he said one of the great things about Blue Sky is they don't ask for money. Although that's, you know, that's certainly not the case anymore. I mean, and it shouldn't be. But there is this tendency we just do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And also I know that I was visiting with someone who was attending Photolucida from Seattle. And they said, you know, Seattle is a lot bigger. There are lots of photographers, but none of them know each other. And they couldn't do anything like this there because there's no community.
Yeah. I think the sense of community and interconnectivity, the landscape is a starting point, but it's everybody feeding on everybody else's ideas and taking tangents off of tangents off of tangents. And every direction is accepted in the community here. So even though there's no one subject matter, but it's just that inclusive feeling that I think is pretty unique in photo communities.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, before we open it up to questions, do either of you, any of the panelists have questions for other panelists to kind of, or do you want to just open things up for questions from our audience? No? Okay.
I'll make one brief comment that I think is overlooked, that Prudence has a great resume and she's been through all kinds of things, but I want to give a shout out to her and Mark Andres for putting together an absolutely unbelievable collection of art at Portland Community College, Rock Creek. And if you haven't been out there, you owe it to yourself. If you have any interest in Northwest art whatsoever, go to Portland Community Rock Creek and it will blow your mind.
Well, Bill, you had a large role in that.
Tiny compared to you and Mark.
Well, are there any questions? If you want to, I guess you raise your hand under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. If you scroll your mouse down to the bottom of your screen, anyone in the audience, there's a little icon that says reactions and you can raise your hand. So questions. You can also unmute, I think you guys can unmute yourselves if you want to just shout out a question. And type into the chat as well. There's lots of different ways. Oh, yes, Chris. Where are you? Can you talk? Yes, oh, yeah, you are. Okay, you're unmuted. Good.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, we went down and saw the show at the Hallie Ford, and it is a very impressive, lovely collection of photographs. And I'm curious of what the vision is for continuing that going forward, and where you would like that collection to end up in terms of its ambition.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Good question. Well, it's definitely a conversation Bill and I have had a number of times about the museum's commitment to photography and doing photo exhibitions. We've been building the collection. The museum continues to build a variety of different collections, but the actual footprint of the building and the exhibition spaces don't seem to change. And so my vision, and one of the things that I've really enjoyed in the last few years at the museum, is there's been a kind of a renewed interest, and maybe this just comes from being now almost 25 years old, but curating special exhibitions, temporary exhibitions from our permanent collection. And so Bill's show is an example of that. The show we had this past fall called Time and Place, Northwest Art from the Permanent Collection, was the first kind of large scale exhibition that we curated from our permanent collection. That was a thematic show, and there were a number of photographs in that exhibition as well. So I think going forward, we're looking at our collection and how we can use it in not just in our permanent collection galleries, but how we can organize thematic exhibitions that are drawn and curated specifically from our collection. And so the photo collection will be kind of in the mix with all of that. There could be additional photo, strictly photo shows, or just other thematic exhibitions that'll be pulling photography in with the paintings, with the sculptures, with the prints, with other things.
Have you been talking or thinking about, I mean, I know you have limited physical space, but we do also have the internet as a virtual space to have exhibitions. Have you been thinking about doing any sort of web-based exhibitions and writing?
To some degree, actually. When on Saturday, Stu and I were talking about how can we, just starting with the show that's up now, how can that show be recorded and preserved on some level, so when it comes down at the end of April, it's still available as a resource. And so Elizabeth Garrison, our education curator, and I were just talking yesterday about how, how the best way to do that is. And so we have a variety of different things we're going to try over the next, few weeks while the show is still up. And then when the show comes down, we'll be making sure we have good quality images of all the artworks in the show so that we can have a variety of different options about how we present it digitally. But yes, certainly, online exhibitions are always options, and being connected to the university and having those sort of incorporated into kind of student projects, internship projects, are things that we've done a little bit in the past. In recent years, we haven't been doing that so much, but it's always something that we can do more of. Any other questions?
I think there was another one in the chat that.
Oh yes, thanks, Prudence. Any comments on what the current state of photo education in the community of young photographers?
Well, I think there's, I guess some of the actually academic programs have gone away. Like one at Marylhurst was really, exceptional, and it unfortunately met its demise. But there are, the University of Oregon has a very strong program, and Portland Community College does, and I think Portland State, and certainly in Washington. And I think there are many great young photographers. I see them all the time, and I know that the Blue Sky Exhibition Committee now has expanded, and it has a lot of younger people, because there was a little concern that it was going to kind of age along with us, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So, and we have 3/5 of the original founders here today. So, at least Bob DeFranco was there somewhere. There he is. I see.
They have a program at Oregon State University as well.
Right, that's right. Yeah. See, this is where I forget things, and I regret that I didn't.
They do have a great program at Oregon State. Yeah. Good photographers teaching there. Yeah. Another question here in the chat. Thank you for this presentation, Bill and Stu. Can you talk more about the Northwest Photo Archive with the University of Washington, its mission and scope?
Why don't you start off, Bill? You're muted.
Sure. No, it's like, it's the same as the photographers, it's, I feel like photography is underrepresented. And of course, we'd like to have a permanent gallery at the Hallie Ford when you put on the 3rd floor. But the photo archive is something that I think had been largely overlooked in our region. There's the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson, but in some cases you have to be pretty far up the totem pole to be considered there. And unfortunately, that leaves out a lot of really extraordinary artists. And we wanted to make sure that their work was preserved as well. I think when you look in this exhibition and look at the collection, in order to have in one sense, some street cred. You need to have people who with name familiarity like Brett Weston and Bob Adams and Michael Kenna. And then there's other people that aren't quite as well recognized. But when you see the photographs juxtaposed with one another, they hold up. And I think it's good that people recognize there's some really outstanding photographers in this region. And so we want to preserve that work through archiving negatives, contact sheets, correspondence, everything that went along with an artist's career.
Yeah, basically, we want to try to preserve some of the history because this was really a rich region as far as photographers. And as we age out and our kids or estates or whatever look at all of our stuff and they say, what are we going to do with this? There's important work here to the history of art and history of photography that we want to preserve. And that's what the Northwest Photographers Archive is all about, trying to preserve that work for history.
And Stu put together a really nice website. So if you want to learn a little bit more about it, it's Pacific Northwest Photographers Archive, PNPA.
.org.
.org.
A couple more things in the chat. One from Chris. Yes, it's being recorded. And it'll actually be replayed on, I think, the 25th on the radio here in Salem, but it'll also, the recording will post to the exhibition webpage as well once once we get it up there in the next few days, probably, or week or so. Another question, I'm thinking about the influence of the San Francisco Art Institute on evergreen photographers and the style of street photography combined with magic realism. Would any of the panelists like to comment on that?
Sure, because I was there to, and I can tell the tale. For one thing, Lawrence Schlim who asked the question was at Evergreen and has gone on to have an exceptional career in photography. He's a fantastic photographer. So, and when you asked the question about whether there's a style, a Northwest style, it flashed into my mind. Well, we were to a large extent there was a lot of travel between the Northwest and the San Francisco Art Institute. There were a couple years there where I don't know how many trips I made there, and it was the Art Institute. I mean, of course, we would do other things, visit museums and have cannoli or whatever, but it was very important, visually. And I don't know, Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it was the hippie time. So we'd pile into my VW bus and we'd all go down there and meet all these interesting photographers down there. And I remember when Ken Graves and Mitchell Payne were working on their American Snapshot book, we went over there because Terry and I were both snapshot collectors. And his roommate was Steve Collins, who was this great photographer who we immediately showed at Blue Sky. But it was that San Francisco and Portland were these two major hotbeds of photography. And if you compare what was happening in San Francisco to what was happening in LA or whatever, it was just much more in San Francisco than anywhere else. And you compare Portland to equivalent cities to Portland, and there was much more happening in Portland. So I think there was a natural fascination with each other as the two cities.
I should say too, probably Chris should have been doing this talk because he didn't take a 30-year hiatus like I did.
That's why you're fresher, Craig.
Great. Well, any other questions? We're good. Okay. Well, I think if we don't see any more questions pop up and no more hands go up, I'd like to thank the panelists and everyone for coming and listening, and hope you all get a chance to get to Salem to see the exhibition before it closes on the 23rd. It'll be up until the 23rd. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
23rd of April or March?
23rd of April, Stu. Yeah.
Okay.
It'll be up to the 23rd of April. Sorry. So everyone's got about a month and a half to get to Salem.
And we'll be
You're
there
all-
on April 2nd to answer questions.
That's right. Yes. Yes. April 2nd in the morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
nice
you,
evening.
Prudence.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Great.
you.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you
Thanks so
all.
much.